welcome to Mental Health Monday with the lovely and beautiful Anna. And I myself is Bryon. And we are here to talk about mental health and everything that is mental health, and just being here to be your relatable podcast to talk about all things mental health. And today, we're going to be talking about the lovely emotional literacy and naming feelings and just understanding yourself on a real basic but great level. So we're going to kick it off by sending it over to the lovely Anna.
Awesome. So, yeah, we're going to be talking about emotional literacy today. So, that is recognizing, naming, and understanding our emotions. Really, why does this matter? It really helps to identify what it is that we're dealing with so that way we can deal with it the best way that we can. Being able to recognize, name, and understand our emotions can help us to better understand ourselves and others. Then we can learn how to process everything a little bit better through various tools and methods, which can be different for every person. And then how to interact with one another in the best way that we choose to at that moment.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to put it. I think as a socially awkward person at times myself, I'm like the weirdest introvert extrovert, but it's find myself wondering why I'm feeling feelings and what does that mean and where I'm at in certain situations. So it's definitely something great to know and to talk about, to kind of check in with yourself and what's going on, why am I reacting this way, and what am I feeling right now. And I think that's one part that we skip over a lot of times, and what I've learned through the process of getting to really know myself and just life lessons, because you learn from life lessons. And why am I reacting this way, why am I feeling this way, gets skipped over to just reactions most of the time until you start to really dial it in. So it's good to know, and it's a helpful tool to be able to distinguish where and what's going on with you as you know, ask yourself those questions and check in with yourself. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, you were mentioning that, and I just thought of one thing that I had learned over this last year, and I just keep it in the back of my mind is that a trigger is just a signal to your body. And all of the things that you may have learned or not learned over the years and about yourself, others, your conditioning, that all comes into play when that trigger comes. And so learning and kind of going back to these basics helps to gain and set that foundation and to kind of reset it, relay that foundation, that concrete a little bit sturdier. So that way we have a sturdier and just overall better house for us to live in.
yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. I think given any sort of situation we deal with, it leads to emotions and feelings and thoughts that kind of just race through our heads. So we just
Yeah.
need to wrap our head around what those things are. I know a beautiful tool that you showed me, and definitely in my time in therapy, if I go in and say, hey, I don't know, I'm just okay, nothing's really going on. And she always says, well, don't make me pull out the emotions wheel. We're going to find out where you are so that we can start to talk about what we need to talk about, or just figure out a starting place. So it is important
Yeah.
to kind of find where you're at, and then we can backtrack in a way of kind of running over why we're upset, what we're upset about, and why we're reacting in the ways that we are. So
Yeah. Yeah. And when you were growing up, like in elementary school, preschool, or whatnot, babysitter, did you have an emotions wheel? I don't recall ever seeing one back then for myself.
no, and it probably would have helped quite a bit because I was definitely a very what felt very anxiety ridden kid. So I'm sure if I could figure out what that feeling was or was explained that a long time ago, that I would probably feel a lot easier to be able to express myself rather than, you know, run these questions and feel these feelings that were definitely coming up. So yeah, if I had a place to put it, even back then, probably would have been pretty awesome. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, because I feel like in the last like 5-10 years, mental health really come to the forefront. So there in the beginning and around when I was a youngin, there was not as much talked about or even probably studied at that point. I mean, granted, but not as widespread as it is now. So
Absolutely. Yeah, that's well said. I mean, that's one of the things that I keep seeing pop up is that in our generation and even ones just immediately after, it's really just the generation that is coming up right now that there's the awareness around mental health and emotions and how they play in together, emotions, thoughts, feelings. And it really wasn't until, pretty recently that these things started becoming emotions wheel became a more normal practice in schools and youth. So really we were raised off of folks who also didn't have that, most likely, and their parents probably didn't have it either, or have anything to really clarify the broad spectrum of emotions that we have within us, because it's not just like the primary colors that we have. It's not just happy, mad, sad. Yeah, it's not just those three. There's so many different emotions. And that's one of the things that I learned recently is getting clarity on what emotions were, what how they play in with thoughts and feelings, and getting a very clear understanding of that and how each correlates and leads to the other one, and how we can work to get to that root and reshape those, because those all become embedded conditioning and beliefs that we set for ourselves. And neuroscience shows that you can change those beliefs, you can change those patterns in different ways. So that's one thing I'm looking forward to digging into as we go along.
yeah, it's definitely well put. I feel like the emotions, leading to thoughts and feelings is definitely where there was, you know, maybe I found that out later, but I did find it out, and that's a beautiful thing to start to reel that in. And I feel like when we have our emotions, it gives us, signals like where we are out exterior and interior of what's going on with us, which is very, very important and very important to read because some people get tight in their chest or get anxious or their head hurts or they just, freeze. That we'll talk about soon with all the different ways we can react to all that stuff. But definitely, you know, we, as an overthinker, those feelings turn into thoughts. And that is one of my OCD tendencies is to constantly have conversations and constantly run through and trickle down, just overthinking as a whole, which is a very difficult thing that I've had to deal with throughout this whole mental health experience. But where that's very helpful to realize and step back from, that it was coming from emotions that I was feeling. So it ties together in that for sure of my emotions were kind of running my thoughts, and then my thoughts were going 12 miles an hour, which is really fast for a brain. And it just was only hurting me. But then, you step it back and then you realize that you're coming from a place of emotion. And then obviously I was hurting my own feelings by my own thoughts. And so it's just like a chain reaction going from, emotions to thoughts to feeling it. And honestly, when we take a step back and kind of slow the roll. And I know that has been one of the hardest things. If you are an overthinker, these steps, that second one is a heavy one, thoughts, then that's driving from emotion. It's another tough part about all this. And then when you're feeling it, you can be irrational or rational, but it's all about the work that you put in to kind of work on all three of those things to kind of like now I can tell myself, cool, chill out, you're fine. Like you're just like actually getting diagnosed with the OCD for that helped me probably as much as how much time I've spent on it and worked on it. I feel like just finding out that my brain kind of was being mean to me in a way of like, okay, that makes sense. That clicks and understanding and and to be able to get that under control. That's probably why I've been in the best space in a long time. Just be able to just you know, really slow the game down and, as the emotions hit, kind of sitting with it. And then, my thoughts aren't as crazy because I'm giving it a moment. And then you start to feel it and it's not as intense. You kind of slow things down so that it's not red hot, red hot, red hot. It's,
Mhm.
slow and steady. And then you can be able to, you know, understand it better and understand where your emotions lie, and where you can try to be more sensible about the situation. And I know that sounds so ridiculous when you're angry and everything else in the world's just coming down on you, but it's really about slowing it down. But these are important things to know about yourself and understand where these things are, what going on, in the sense of it's not just a reaction. There is things that go on, there is steps there to how everything works in that type of situation. And that's an everyday situation and an all the time situation. And some are way more intense and some are just typical stuff that you just do and you don't even think about it. So as we dig
Yeah.
deeper into that, it's going to be quite the interesting topic. I know that for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that, and thank you for sharing that. And it makes so much sense because you got that diagnosis, you had a name to it that explained it, and then you were able to, just like with emotions. Okay, so saying the recognizing and saying this emotion, like I feel anxious in the situation, it gives a name to it, so then you can learn how to deal with it from there. Like, say, if you have any other diagnosis, like I have this diagnosis of this condition. Okay, well, now I know what it is. How can I treat it? How can I work with it? What do I need? What am I feeling? And how do I adapt to it? And the same thing with emotions. It's like neuroscience shows that if you label the emotion, you can work from more of a reflective mode, like you're saying, versus a reactive mode. So it's just telling your brain and your nervous system, hey, I see what's happening. We're going to be okay. This is what or first of all, we're going to be okay. And this is what we're going to do about the situation. Kind of like if you are in an emergency situation, it's having somebody that knows something about, they've experienced it before, and they come in and they're like, hey, you're going to be okay. This is what it is, and this is what we're going to do. And you can work through it on a more calm state versus a enhanced nervous state.
It's not easy, but it's something that we can get to, and that's a beautiful thing, to be able to slow down and be able to take the situation as it comes and not react right away. And that's definitely something we'll get into. But I definitely want the listeners to kind of start to listen to themselves and find out how they feel. Ask yourself, like, I feel right now good. And that's
Mhm.
even a good thing to feel, because then I'm reacting and, feeling my feelings and telling my tells and saying it out loud and putting it out there. So, it's not as much processing to keep it inside and then, run it down the mill. That was my brain of just trying to find every solution in every spot there. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's an
It's
important thing. I
exhausting.
mean, we'll throw up an emotions wheel. I think that's important. I think to kind of just keep track of yourself and just, you know, see where you land and find out, you know, where we go from there or what changes, because we're ever changing. So we're not going
Yeah.
to just be good all day. That'd be pretty cool for sure. But I don't know how
Yeah.
possible that is 100 out of 100 times. So I would hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it could be something as simple like, okay, you're doing fine. And then all of a sudden you get this email from a manager or supervisor that just kind of raises your adrenaline a little bit and makes you anxious. And, there's a lot of different things that makes us ebb and flow throughout every single day and in different moments. And, I just wanted to throw out the definitions of emotions, thoughts, and feelings that
Yeah,
really
please do.
helped
Please do.
me. Yeah, it brought me so much clarity that emotions are just signals that provide information to our internal and external environment. They're sensations felt in the body. And then thoughts are the mental interpretations of those emotions. And then feelings are the meanings that we give to that experience and situation. So really it all goes back to that initial sensation that we feel in our body. That is really, it's meant for a good thing. It's meant to trigger our system and to say, okay, if you are in danger, to prepare us for that. But now we're not like running from lions and whatnot. At least most people aren't, hopefully. But but instead it can be triggered by something else. And so really going back to see, okay, understand those emotions, those signals, and to think and have clear thoughts. Well, first of all, recognizing them and naming them, and then being able to, that helps us to think a little bit more clearly and assess, okay, what is my mental interpretation of this emotion that I'm feeling, this signal, and then what meaning am I giving to it? And it helps to actually see things a little bit more clearly instead of in a fog. And also understanding, okay, negative emotions, what people call our negative emotions, aren't really bad. They're just signals. They're your body's way of really trying to protect and prepare us, or protect and prepare us. So in case we are actually in a crisis situation or a bad situation, to be able to handle that accordingly.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right on the head with that. I do believe that it could be how we aren't in the same situations of a lion's, running from a lion and all that. I feel like that's very true. Everything is so different in the world today, and how things affect us, and it happens right in our face, and things, our defense mechanisms and everything, our body giving us signals about what we're feeling and how we're feeling, comes in a lot of different ways, and we're learning as much as everybody else is, but it's a it's a good thing to learn about why we're feeling these ways and what's going on, and the naming your emotions and really just getting to know what's going on, and be, because your brain is doing a good thing because it's trying to protect you, but at the same time it could be the meanest bone in your body because it's giving you an easy way out. Say, and
Yep.
a lot of the times the easy way out is just reactions and just flying off the handle or anything of that nature, of just not really thinking things through and not being able to process things, and because they
Mhm.
know that's a fail safe to kind of, what being upset feels like, and they're just trying to make your life easier, but it's the worst advice you can get from your own self, is probably the the toughest part about learning about all this stuff, is that sometimes you're your own worst enemy, and that's not just a clever song, that's a real statement, because your brain really wants to help you, but it's not the best way to go about it, and then once you kind of reel that in, you feel like a different person. So it's good to know what
Yeah.
you're feeling. That is definitely what I took from that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it really, it also goes back to, when we were little too, how the different situations that we had growing up as a small child, as a baby, different conditionings, because each situation experience shapes us and it creates a pattern over time, because we learn so quickly. If you're ever around this child, you see just how quickly they pick up things, they learn things. And so a lot of that stuff too is just based off of old conditioning that we've had over the years, and it's a repeated pattern. And so, how we may react in a certain situation now as adults, it's a lot of times based off of what we have experienced in previous years, whether it be childhood or later in adulthood. And so going back and like really questioning those things and seeing how we are currently helps to identify what patterns we may have and what we may want to change with those. Also, to society in general conditions us in a lot of different ways. Also teaches us different preconceived notions, like men shouldn't show emotion, which is horrible. Men shouldn't show emotion and women are too emotional. All those different ideas that are embedded in us over time. And, we can identify that in ourselves through naming our emotions or lack thereof, and be able to really deepen how we are as a person and shape how we want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a beautiful way to put it because the social norm is something that we'll definitely dive quite a bit into, but that's definitely we grow up and we literally go based off of what we learn, not even knowing that we're learning anything because obviously a lot of the time when we're developing, we're not realizing that we're taking everything in, but we're learning, and then that will actually dictate how we behave and react to things as we grow up. And definitely having social norms, and especially today's world, is crazy. And definitely won't say it's not as crazy as it was before, because I think a lot of what we had before these modern times were pretty crazy and not fair at all, and some weird social norms that definitely have been broken down, but there's new ones that keep coming up, just like life. So you got to always be ready, and that's part of the whole, you know, forever, forever learning, forever growing, because this is a situation that changes so often, like we said, and it's good to get ahead of it. So naming your emotions definitely goes along with just finding out about yourself, because that's the best offense is a good defense, and a good defense is reading yourself to be able to know to defend
Yeah.
yourself from doing something stupid like I've done a million trillion times over. So I've learned all of the bad lessons and good lessons, and that's probably why I can be of some assistance in these certain situations, because I know it takes work and it takes time, but I put a lot
Yeah.
of time into this, and it's definitely been worth it. I see a difference, and I just want people to feel that difference as well, because they say the people that know the worst pain or the darkest times always trying to keep it light for everybody else, and I definitely find myself within that category as well. So I'd rather people not go any further down than they need to, and it's important to keep people up and make them feel normal and understand that everybody feels a whole range of different things, and some people feel them all, which is wild but true. So it's good to know where you're at, and you find that out as you go through it. So
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So I was going to ask you, like, are there any particular tips or things that you have been working on or that you have found successful, things that you haven't found successful as far as the process of like naming your emotion and working through it?
definitely what I always like to say is to slow it down. Definitely a lot of interactions that I have and things like that. I could be very quick witted, but if it's a serious topic or anything of a nature of that changes my emotions quite a bit, I have to think about it and then respond. And definitely taking the time to kind of
Yeah.
hear the whole thing is definitely something that I do for myself. So I always say slow it down, slow what's going on down, and even if that makes you feel or had been made to feel like that's kind of weird or whatever, I think that's like the smartest thing you can do, because you're giving yourself time to think about what you're encountering, and then you can kind of think about your emotions, how you're feeling, and then respond with more knowledge than just a knee jerk reaction. So I think slowing down is one of the big things I always say, and then giving yourself, there's always not always a timeout in life, but there should be a lot of opportunity for you to say, "Hey, I just need to wrap my head around this. Give me time." And I think that's what I
Hmm.
mean by slowing down is time, to be able to, not be trying to be a boxer and go fast. We're just trying to learn our moves and what serves us good. So yeah, slowing down is definitely something I suggest for people. And if you can't do that yet, it's something to work towards for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree so much. Yeah, I saw that and I've been putting it into practice over this last year, especially, when I had my corporate job, it was doing that same thing, slowing it down. And in that slowing down process, asking questions. So, my boss would come back to me with feedback, oftentimes, feedback I didn't request. And so, sometimes it could be a little daunting. It can hurt a little bit, but in understanding as I, got to understand him as I worked with him more and more, I understood how, like, what his intent was. And it was to help me and to help me improve. And so that was the reason for the feedback. And knowing that in the back of my mind, I could then say, whenever he came to me with criticism or feedback, it was saying, okay, he's coming from a place he wants me to learn and grow. And that immediately helped me to level out my defenses and then start asking questions, getting curious, because that's where your fact finding comes in. Because like sometimes we may be perceiving a situation, even if we know the person really well and we work with them and we've had similar conversations before, we may interpret things incorrectly. It happens all the time, especially via text message or email, but even in person, and just saying, oh, okay, this is how, or, and just asking questions, and even sometimes repeating it back and saying, this is how I'm receiving this. Is this how it was intended? Depending upon the situation. And that kind of helps to gain a better understanding, to level out that emotion, get that better thought, or get that understanding, the thought in place, and then you can have a overall different feeling about it. I noticed a lot of times in that particular situation is I would leave feeling a lot better. And also I improved my relationship with my boss then, because we had those conversations. Any kind of conflict is, it's kind of corny to say, but it's like, oh, every conflict, every challenge is an opportunity to learn. It really is. It sucks, especially when that's like a lot of the times how we end up learning. I know me is just through having challenges, but having it and slowing it down, like you're saying, and going through that process not only help to learn, but to help deepen that relationship and gain a better understanding. And then it just helps to compound in a good way for future situations.
Yeah, you said it. I mean, that's not much better way to put it. I know work stress is a touchy subject for a lot of people, and I feel that same way. I was stressed out at work all the time, feeling like I'm not doing enough, and then I kind of just slowed things down and was like, why am I putting extra pressure on myself? Why am I doing this? And then asking myself why is what we're saying is like, you're just slowing it down and figuring it out why. And then when you kind of, go through logic and try to make sense of it, it makes it a lot easier on yourself when you start to realize that, like, we got to zoom out in life and stop zooming in so hard on what we're not doing or things like that. And that really does come down to slowing down to kind of like look over what's really going on and not just a quick glance and saying, my world is on fire, because I definitely had a tendency to do that. So work stress is something that, that's a great example of being able to just identify what was pushing me and who was pushing me and why I was feeling the way I was and why my feelings were having this reaction of feeling stressed out and all this stuff. And that stuff never like fully goes away, but for how much it's different from the initial reactions, and after taking time to do that, it's a whole different ball game where that stress will lighten your load and lighten your day, so it just becomes easier to deal with every days and every moment. So that's why it's important to figure out what you're feeling and why you're feeling it and why you have reactions the way you do. So
Yeah, yeah. And one thing that and it's so hard to do it in a moment when you're dealing with somebody, especially, or even just like if you're having a panic attack, trying to deal with that in the moment. And and that's something that we'll talk about later, later episode. But it's learning these tools and tricks of what works best for each of us on an individual basis and individual situations, which it may vary from situation to situation for each person. But having those readily available tools that you've tried and you figure out, okay, this works for me, then you have that first aid kit, so to speak,
yeah,
handy when you are in a situation like that. One of the things I just thought about pretty recently and I started doing is, we don't always have time to like sit well, the clearest way for me to be able to decipher these things is just to like either quickly write it down, which, you don't have a lot of time to be doing that throughout the day, but a voice note on your phone. or a voice or just a memo in your phone in the notes app. Just quickly, okay, this is what I'm feeling. These are the thoughts I have about it. These are the feelings I have, and then just like taking a step back and like, okay, well, what does this mean? Putting that together, and that could be just, or just even recording it and getting it out, expressing it. It helps to name that emotion and to de-escalate it in our body and to calm ourselves down a bit more, and to really understand and to recognize it and engage, and so that way we can gain a little bit of clarity in the fog.
Clarity in the fog. That was a great way to put it. I think that will wrap us up for this show, but we look forward to speaking with you more. I think next week we're going to get into the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And I get to tell you how much I love those for sure. But that has a lot to do with what we're talking about now and how we react and how we feel in the moment and how to deal with that. Definitely trying to clear the fog is something that will carry on to next week's episode for sure, because that's where we try to help and try to give you some clarity through things that are foggy and help you understand and help us relate to you and you to relate to us on how we can just make the clouds go away a little bit, get a little bit of that sunshine because we all need it. So
Yes.
for the lovely Anna and Bryon, it's been Mental Health Monday, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. So see you next time.
Bye, take care.